There are moments in life when the truth doesn't simply surface, it detonates. For years, Kira believed the worst pain she could experience was losing Jonas to a world of wealth, expectations, and a marriage arranged without her consent. She thought nothing could outmatch the night she shut the door on the man she loved and cried herself sick, carrying a secret that nearly cost her life. But she was wrong. The real explosion came years later in a mansion built on legacy and lies. This was the day Jonas walked into his mother's estate, holding the hands of the 3 little girls he never knew existed. 3 daughters who had survived only because their mother signed away her dignity in a hospital bed. 3 children whose father had been kept from them by the very woman who claimed to love him most. When Jonas laid the documents on that polished coffee table, evidence of manipulation, surveillance, and a contract designed to erase Kira forever, the air turned sharp. His mother's perfect composure cracked, and then shattered. As Kira spoke with quiet strength, born from surviving the unthinkable, Jonas confronted the woman who had stolen years he could never get back. The confrontation wasn't loud, it wasn't theatrical, it was worse, it was honest. And in that honesty, every life in that room changed course. If you think that moment was decisive, wait until you hear how their story began. Let's rewind, back to the rain, the heartbreak, and the decision that set everything in motion. The rain fell in sheets that blurred the world into watercolor smudges as Jeffrey stood beneath the dim hallway light outside Kira Mason's apartment. Water streamed from his hair and soaked through his suit, turning the fabric heavy against his skin. He barely felt the cold. His pulse was too loud, his breath too unsteady, his heart pounding with the weight of the decision already carved into stone by people who had never cared who he loved. Kara stood in the doorway, wearing the soft caramel sweater he had once wrapped around her shoulders on a night that felt a lifetime ago. It dwarfed her, making her look smaller, yet the stillness in her eyes made him feel half her size. Raindrops clung to her lashes, her breathing was shallow. She looked at him the way someone looks at a house collapsing, knowing there is no saving what is already falling apart. He forced himself to speak. His voice felt rusted. He told her he could not marry her. He told her his parents had chosen another woman. He told her the contracts were signed and the date set. He told her everything was already in motion. Each confession tasted like betrayal. Each one dimmed the light in her eyes a little more. Kara did not interrupt. She listened with a quiet that made him ache. The rain thundered on the hallway tiles behind him, but the actual storm was the one building between them. Her silence was a verdict long before her words arrived. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft enough that he had to lean in to hear it. She said he was telling her now because everything was already arranged, because the invitations were printed, because he had agreed before coming here, because he wanted to ease his conscience, not fight for their love. The truth stung worse than the rain biting at his skin. He tried to explain. He spoke of the late nights when he had argued with his parents behind closed doors. He told her how the future of the family company was tied to an alliance they insisted he fulfill. How thousands of employees depended on the merger. How his parents believed marrying Kara would collapse the empire generations had built. He admitted he had hoped for more time, had convinced himself he could introduce her slowly and change their minds, only to discover that the decision had never been his to make. Yet saying these things did not soften anything. It only revealed how little he had fought, how little he had risked, how thoroughly he had surrendered before ever walking through her door. Kira took a step back into her apartment, and in that slight movement, he felt everything unravel. Her arms wrapped around herself, as if she needed to hold her own ribs together. Her eyes shimmered but did not spill. She looked at him with the clarity of someone who had finally understood the truth she had tried not to see. She asked him one question: why now? He had no answer worth speaking. Jeffrey reached for her hand, but she moved away with a grace that felt like a goodbye. No dramatic gesture, no raised voice, only a quiet refusal that hurt far worse. Rain hammered the hallway floor. Somewhere below them, a car splashed through a puddle, the sound echoing like something breaking. Jeffrey stood frozen, watching her chest rise and fall, As she battled tears he knew she did not want him to witness. She told him he was not here to choose her. He was here to confess that he had already chosen the life designed for him by everyone except the woman he loved. She told him love that bends under pressure will always snap. She told him he had made his decision long before tonight. And then she did the thing that destroyed him more completely than anger ever could. She closed the door. No slam, no accusation, just a soft click that sounded like the last note of a song ending too soon. He stayed there long after the hallway emptied of sound. Rain dripped from his hair onto the tiled floor. The light above him flickered, emitting a faint buzzing sound. His chest felt hollow, as if something essential had slipped out when the door shut. Jeffrey waited for the handle to turn. It never moved. When he finally turned away and walked down the corridor, every footstep felt heavier than the last. Outside, the storm showed no signs of stopping. It beat against him as if trying to wash away the choice he had made. But nothing washed clean. Nothing softened. The truth stayed sharp. He had let the only woman he had ever wanted slip out of his life without a fight. And as he stepped into the rain, one devastating certainty settled in his chest. He had lost her. Not because someone else took her, but because he had not been brave enough to keep her. The storm had barely faded when Kira collapsed against the inside of her apartment door, sliding down until she was sitting on the cold floor with her knees pulled to her chest. The sweater Jeffrey once gave her felt too heavy, too warm, too familiar, and she pressed her face into her hands as the tears finally broke free. She refused to cry in front of him. She refused to give him that final piece of her vulnerability. But alone in the dim silence of her living room, she let the grief come in waves that felt endless. She cried until her throat burned, and her breath came sharp and uneven. Outside, dawn crept slowly across the city, gradually washing the dark sky to a muted gray. The rain eased into a soft drizzle. Somewhere, a car alarm chirped. Life continued without caring that hers had just collapsed. When she could finally stand, she pushed herself to the bathroom. The mirror showed a stranger. Her eyes were swollen, her cheeks blotched, her lips trembling. She let out a shaky laugh that sounded nothing like humor. She splashed cold water on her face and tried to steady her breathing, but the ache inside her chest refused to settle. Then it hit her. A sudden wave of nausea rose without warning. She barely reached the toilet before she was retching, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the sink. The sickness came in relentless surges, leaving her weak and shaking. At first, she told herself it was exhaustion, stress, dehydration. Last night's heartbreak turned her insides to knots, but the nausea kept coming, lingering, growing. A memory surfaced. Her sister, years ago, described the way early pregnancy crept in like a whisper. The late-night conversations, the warnings, the jokes about being careful. A cold chill ran through her. No. She found herself moving on instinct, grabbing a coat, slipping out the door while the world was still half asleep. She walked quickly through puddled sidewalks to the corner convenience store, her breath fogging in the morning air. The clerk barely looked up when she bought 3 pregnancy tests, but she felt exposed, shaken, as if the whole world knew what she was about to confirm. Back home, she paced her bathroom like a caged animal waiting for a verdict she already feared. The first test showed the result instantly, the line dark and unyielding. The second confirmed it. The third was even darker. She sank onto the edge of the bathtub and pressed the heels of her palms to her eyes, trying to breathe through the shock. Pregnant, already carrying the children of the man who had just walked away. She knew she should call him, tell him, give him a chance to show something different. But the memory of last night returned with painful clarity. The way he had explained the merger, the thousands of jobs, the family legacy, the printed invitations, the duty he had already chosen. He had surrendered long before she realized surrender was even an option. Her phone buzzed on the counter, startling her. An unknown number, probably a coworker. Maybe a friend is checking in. She ignored it, wrapping her arms around herself as the reality settled deeper. She was pregnant, alone, and already terrified. Hours later, She found herself sitting in a clinic waiting room, clutching her bag in both hands as she waited for her emergency appointment to be called. The white walls felt too bright. The murmurs of nurses and patients seemed far away, muffled by the pounding of her heart. When the ultrasound technician laid the wand on her abdomen, Kira held her breath. The screen flickered, shifting into shadows and shapes she did not know how to read. Then the technician froze. Kira felt her stomach drop. The technician excused herself and returned moments later with another doctor, a specialist. Their faces were too calm, too careful. The doctor pointed at the screen and spoke in a gentle tone. There were 3 heartbeats, 3 tiny clusters of life. Triplets, high risk from the start. Her blood disorder is complicating everything. The treatment is necessary. The costs are unthinkable. The danger is real. Each word made her vision blur. She felt as though she were floating outside herself, watching the conversation without being part of it. The specialist continued talking about transfusions, medications, and weekly monitoring. About risk. About survival. About choices no one should have to make alone. By the time they handed her the printed information, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the papers. She walked outside into the early afternoon light, the sun warm on her face, but doing nothing to ease the cold building in her chest. She stopped on the sidewalk, clutching the railing as her legs threatened to give out. Triplets, Jeffrey's children. Their children, growing inside her while he celebrated his upcoming wedding to someone else. Her phone buzzed again. She pulled it out with trembling fingers and dialed his number. It rang once, twice. Someone answered, not Jeffrey. A woman's voice floated through the phone, laughing lightly as music and clinking glasses drifted behind her. She said the groom was too busy celebrating to pick up. Kira hung up so fast her thumb stung. She stood frozen as the city moved around her, feeling hollowed out. She made her way home, each step heavier than the last. That night, she sat on her small balcony, knees pulled to her chest, staring at the city lights far below. She thought about the man she loved, the man who chose duty, the man who had not chosen her. She thought about the 3 lives inside her, fragile, precious, dependent on her alone. She thought about calling him again, begging, pleading, hoping. But she saw his face in the rain. He had made his choice. And now she had to make hers. The night after the clinic felt too still, as if the world were holding its breath with her. Kira lay in bed staring at the ceiling, one hand resting over the small, flat plane of her abdomen, where 3 tiny heartbeats pulsed in complete innocence. She had barely slept, drifting in and out of shallow dreams that dissolved into fear each time she woke. The doctor's words kept circling in her mind. High risk, immediate intervention, experimental treatment, life-threatening. The cost is enough to drown anyone who wasn't born into wealth. Every time she blinked, the ultrasound screen reappeared. 3 hazy shapes, 3 sparks of life flickering in the dark. She felt a mix of awe and terror. And she felt alone in a way that made her chest ache. By morning, she could no longer pretend she had choices that felt safe. The truth stood before her with cold clarity. She was carrying 3 babies who needed more care than she could ever afford. She had a body that might fail before they could be born. And she had no partner to lean on, no family nearby, no safety net waiting to hold her up if she collapsed. Her phone sat silent on the nightstand, as though it knew she could not bear to see his name. She reached for it anyway and opened her messages. No calls from Jeffrey, no texts, no attempt to check on her. He was likely still wrapped in wedding rehearsals, surrounded by people who believed his life was perfectly arranged, everyone cheering him into a future she had no place in. Kira shut off the phone, feeling something inside her harden. If he wanted to fight for her, he would have come. If he tried to call back, he would have already done so. If he cared enough, nothing would have stopped him. She repeated those thoughts until they felt like truth, rather than heartbreak. By late afternoon, she sat on her balcony, wrapped in a blanket despite the warm breeze. The sun slid lower across the sky, painting everything gold, but she felt no warmth. She watched people move on the sidewalks below, living their ordinary lives while she tried to solve an impossible equation. She could call him again, tell him about the triplets, watch his world tilt off its axis. Hope he chose her, hope he ran, hope he became the man she once believed he could be. But if he didn't, if he hesitated, if he chose duty again, the rejection would shatter her in ways she might never recover from. And worse, it would stain the lives of the 3 children she already loved more than her own breath. She could stay, fight alone, hope her body held on, hope the system had cracks wide enough for her to slip through. But hope was not a plan, and the numbers the doctor had shown her painted a terrifying picture of how quickly things could go wrong. Or she could disappear, leave the city, leave everyone she knew, build a life from nothing without looking back. She had done hard things before, but this felt like stepping off a cliff with no safety rope. Her hand drifted to her stomach again, and she closed her eyes. The decision was waiting, heavy and relentless. The knock on her apartment door startled her into sitting up. She froze for a long moment before finally pushing herself to her feet. When she opened the door, a tall woman in a tailored charcoal suit stood in the hallway. She looked out of place among the peeling paint and worn carpet, polished in a way that suggested old money and colder intentions. The woman introduced herself calmly, her voice smooth as glass. She represented a private medical foundation, a foundation that specializes in complicated pregnancies, a foundation that had heard about Kara's condition, a foundation willing to pay for everything she needed, every treatment, every specialist, every emergency. No cost would fall on her. It sounded too good, too convenient, too perfectly timed. The woman offered an envelope. Inside was the contract. Kara scanned the pages. The medical care listed made her stomach twist with desperate gratitude. But the final clause made her breath stop. To accept the funding, she had to sever all contact with Jeffrey Hale. She could never tell him about the pregnancy, never reveal paternity, never appear in his life again. Failure to comply would trigger severe legal action, including the possibility of losing her children. Kara felt dizzy as she read. The woman did not threaten. She did not raise her voice. She waited, poised and patient, as though she already knew how this would end. Kara's heart pounded painfully. She imagined Jeffrey's mother signing off on this contract, wanting her gone, wanting the problem erased, wanting the future polished and perfect for their family name. She hated the contract, hated the coldness behind it, hated that her love had brought her to this moment. But she looked at the pages describing the medical interventions, the transfusions, the risks, the costs. Her babies needed her alive. Her hands shook so hard she could barely hold the pen. Her signature crawled across the paper, sealing her fate. When the door finally closed behind the woman, Kara collapsed to her knees. Her tears hit the floor like shattered glass. The choice she had made was brutal, but it was the only one that promised her children a chance at life. From that moment on, she belonged to silence, to secrecy, to vanishing. And before dawn the next day, she packed a single suitcase, laid a trembling hand on her still flat stomach, and walked out of the life she once believed she could have. Kara woke to the rhythmic beeping of machines and the sterile scent of antiseptic long before she understood where she was. The world around her felt softened at the edges, as if someone had draped a thin veil between her and reality. Voices drifted through the haze, low and urgent, carrying a tension that pulled her fully awake. Her body ached in ways she had no language for. Her limbs felt heavy and uncooperative, pinned by exhaustion. When she tried to sit up, a nurse gently pressed her hand to her shoulder, guiding her back down with quiet firmness. "You are safe now. Rest." Safe. The word felt foreign. The memories returned slowly, sliding into place with the weight of inevitability. The months of treatment, the transfusions, the endless nights when she wondered if her heart could hold another ounce of fear. The slow weakening of her body under the strain of carrying 3 fragile lives at once. The morning her blood pressure spiked so violently that alarms began screaming before she could even call for help. And then, darkness. Now she was here, somewhere between survival and aftermath. She tried to speak, but her throat burned. The nurse offered her a sip of water and waited until she could manage a whisper. "My babies, where are they?" The nurse's expression softened, and she motioned to the far side of the room. Kira turned her head with effort, and her breath caught. 3 small isolette cribs stood side by side, illuminated by soft blue lights. Inside each, impossibly tiny infants lay cocooned in warmth and machinery. Transparent tubes curved around their bodies. Their chests rose and fell in fragile rhythms. They looked like dolls carved from porcelain, their skin translucent, their limbs impossibly delicate. But they were alive, fighting, breathing. The nurse helped Kira sit up just enough to see more clearly. Her vision blurred, not from exhaustion now, but from tears she could not hold back. The doctor entered a moment later, a woman with kind eyes and a tired smile. She explained everything slowly, as if speaking to someone balancing on the edge of breaking. The triplets had arrived early, after Kira's body could no longer sustain them. The emergency surgery had been intense. They had lost her twice on the table before bringing her back. Her blood counts were still dangerously low, and her recovery would be long. But the babies were here, small, vulnerable, yet here. The doctor guided her through each isolette. The first daughter had come out weighing barely enough to survive. So small she fit in one of her palms, yet her heartbeat, though faint, was steady. This one would be called Sapphire one day, though Kira did not know it yet. The second daughter had a shock of dark curls that made the nurses smile. She was a fraction larger, a hint stronger, though still bound by tubes and monitors. This one would be Ruby. The smallest arrived last, struggling more than the others, her lungs slow to remember what breathing meant. She had stopped several times since birth. Nurses hovered near her constantly, adjusting settings, whispering encouragement as though she could hear them. This one would be Pearl, the fiercest fighter of all. Kira listened, trembling, as she absorbed every detail, her heart struggling to hold 3 tiny miracles at once. The doctor explained how the foundation had covered everything: the specialized ward, the surgery, the extended neonatal care. Every bill is handled without question. And though Kira nodded, gratitude mixed with dread. She knew the price of that help. She had signed it in ink that morning months ago, sealing her silence forever. Hours passed in a blur of machines and whispered instructions. Nurses guided her through the first touch, pressing her hand gently into each isolette so her fingertips could graze her daughter's hands. She expected fear. Instead, something fierce lit inside her, a surge of love so powerful it brought her to tears again. They had survived. She had survived. Barely, but enough. Days folded into weeks as she healed. She could not walk at first. She could barely sit up without help. Yet she stayed in that room as long as the nurses allowed, watching her daughters grow millimeter by millimeter. Sapphire opened her eyes first, 2 pale gray circles that pierced Kira's heart. Ruby learned to grip her mother's finger with surprising strength. Pearl fought through setback after setback, refusing to let go even when the monitors screamed. The Foundation's representative returned once, her presence sharp against the softness of the neonatal ward. She offered hollow smiles, handed over an envelope of relocation funds, then reminded Kira of the contract's terms. No contact with the father, no trace left behind. A single misstep and all could be taken. Kira nodded silently, clutching Pearl to her chest as she fed her through a tiny tube. She had no intention of risking the daughters she had nearly died bringing into the world. Finally, after months in the artificial glow of hospital lights, the girls were declared stable enough to leave. Together, though still fragile. Kira gathered them in her arms, 3 lives bundled tightly against her heartbeat. She was pale, still weak, still healing, but determination carved strength into her posture. She stepped outside with them for the first time, the sunlight warm against her skin. The world moved as it always had, unaware that she had fought death and pulled 3 miracles from its grasp. She whispered a promise to them as she walked toward her new life. They would grow, they would be loved, and she would protect them from everything, even from the man who would never know he had been a father from the moment 3 tiny hearts first fluttered beneath hers. The apartment Kara found was small enough that her footsteps echoed softly against the bare walls the first night she entered it. She carried only a single suitcase, 3 tiny blankets from the hospital, and a determination that felt far heavier than anything she held in her hands. The triplets slept in borrowed bassinets lined up beside her bed, their little bodies rising and falling in fragile rhythms. She sat beside them long after midnight, listening to the soft hum of the heater and the occasional sigh escaping from Sapphire's tiny lips. The city outside her window moved with its usual restless energy, but in this small room, life slowed into something quieter, more intimate, and infinitely more exhausting. The first weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and constant monitoring. Pearl needed extra feedings. Ruby had trouble staying warm. Sapphire startled easily and cried with a trembling panic that tugged at Kira's heart every time. She learned quickly that caring for 3 infants alone was not simply challenging. It was an unending cycle that consumed every waking moment. The girls had different schedules, different needs, different responses to the world. Someone was always hungry, someone was always crying, someone was constantly fighting to breathe a little easier. But someone was also always reaching for her, always trusting her, and always finding peace in her arms. Kira held on to those moments when her strength wavered. In the early hours of each morning, she worked on her laptop at the kitchen counter, while the girls dozed inside their bassinets. She began designing marketing materials for small businesses online, utilizing the limited skills and software she had acquired from her previous job. At first, she earned almost nothing, a few dollars here and there for logos, flyers, and social media banners. But every bit of income mattered. It bought diapers, formula, tiny socks. She stretched every penny with the precision of someone fighting for survival. Cheap groceries, second-hand clothes, baby items bought from local mothers who offered them with sympathetic smiles. She grew familiar with the thrift stores in her neighborhood, and the women who volunteered there learned the triplets' names long before she did. Days melted into weeks, and weeks into months. Her body healed slowly, though pain lingered in her joints and scar tissue. But she pushed through it. She had no choice. She was mother and father, provider and protector, nurse and comforter, all at once. The foundation never contacted her again, but the contract sat in a drawer like a shadow stretching across her future. She never forgot the clause that threatened to take away her custody, never forgot the wealthy woman's cold warning, never forgot the fear that one mistake could cost her everything. So she never used her real address for anything connected to her past, never reached out to old coworkers, never searched Jeffrey's name online, though she fought the temptation often. She lived in silence because silence meant safety. The triplets grew in small, beautiful ways, which she carefully recorded on her phone. Sapphire was the first to smile, her gray eyes brightening as if touched by some hidden light. Ruby learned to roll over before her sisters and discovered the joy of making tiny sounds that filled the apartment like music. Pearl remained the smallest, but her spirit blazed. She watched everything with sharp curiosity and clung to Kara with a fierce protectiveness that made the nurse's early warnings feel like distant memories. By the time the girls could crawl, the apartment had transformed from a quiet sanctuary into a lively maze of toys, blankets, and child-proof gates. Kira barely slept. She often ate standing up, but she felt a fullness in her chest that made the exhaustion worthwhile. Her business blossomed slowly. Clients returned. New ones came through referrals. She worked through nap times and late nights, her laptop glowing on the table as the girls slept beside her. She built a brand, a reputation. She learned her own worth, piece by piece, through every design she created in stolen moments. The world continued moving around her without noticing the small, decisive victories happening inside her walls. And yet, sometimes, in the quiet minutes just before dawn, she found herself staring at the city lights with a hollow ache beneath her ribs. She wondered if Jeffrey ever thought of her. Suppose he had married the woman his parents chose. if he ever sensed something was missing from his perfect life. Then a soft cry would echo from one of the cribs, pulling her back. She would gather her daughters in her arms, pressing kisses to their foreheads, whispering promises she intended to keep with every ounce of strength she had. They were her world now, her purpose, her reason to keep moving. And though she sometimes felt the ghost of her old life brushing against the edges of her new one, she never allowed herself to turn around. Forward was the only direction she had left. Kira believed she had finally built a life no one could tear apart. A quiet life, a hidden life, safe, stable, untouchable. Until the day she stepped into an upscale children's boutique and made eye contact with a man she thought she would never see again. The bell above the boutique door chimed softly as Kira stepped inside, guiding her 3 daughters by their tiny hands. The shop was warm and bright, filled with pastel dresses and polished wooden shelves that smelled faintly of lavender. It was the kind of place she rarely visited, but today was special. The triplets' birthday was approaching, and she wanted each of them to have a dress that reflected the little personalities blooming inside them. Sapphire tugged toward a display of star-patterned skirts. Ruby drifted toward anything pink, her small fingers brushing ribbons and lace. Pearl stood close to her mother, blinking up at the tall mannequins with cautious curiosity. Kira smiled, letting herself relax in the warm hum of the boutique's atmosphere. For once, she felt almost ordinary. A mother shopping with her daughters. A family blending into the everyday rhythm of life. Then she felt it. A shift in the air behind her. A beat of silence where there should have been soft music and chatter. She turned slowly, her breath catching before she fully understood why. He stood several aisles away, holding a small pair of baby shoes as though he had forgotten what they were. His face drained of color. His posture froze mid-step. His eyes locked onto her like he was seeing someone resurrected from the dead. Jonas. She had not spoken his name aloud in years. She had trained herself not even to think it. But there he was, as real and unavoidable as the memory she had spent so long burying. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Her throat tightened. She swallowed, wishing she could shrink into the floor or vanish into thin air the way she once had. His eyes moved to the children beside her. First to Sapphire, then Ruby, then Pearl. Recognition slammed into him visibly. His grip loosened and the shoes dropped from his trembling hand. They hit the floor with a soft thud that sounded louder than it should have, as though it echoed through every silent year between them. Kira reacted instantly, instinct taking control before thought could catch up. She stepped in front of the girls, guiding them behind her with gentle but urgent hands. Ruby clung to her dress. Pearl frowned, sensing tension. Sapphire blinked up at Jonas with curious gray eyes that mirrored his so unmistakably it made Kira nauseous. He took a single step forward. She shook her head sharply. Stop. Her voice came out low and hard, steadier than she felt inside. Jonas froze again, but the devastation on his face deepened. His lips parted around words that refused to form. His hand lifted halfway, shaking as though unsure whether to reach for her or the girls or nothing at all. Kira felt the room closing in. Other shoppers were beginning to notice, glancing toward them with awkward interest. She hated being watched, hated that her daughters were witnessing this unraveling, hated that Jonas had the power to fracture the fragile peace she had spent years constructing. He finally found enough breath to speak. Are they mine? His voice cracked on the last word, raw with disbelief and desperation. Kira's heart twisted painfully. For a split second, she saw the man he had been before everything fell apart. The one who had once held her in the rain. The one who had made promises he couldn't keep. But that man had disappeared long before she learned she was carrying his 3 daughters. These children belonged to her world, not his. She straightened her back, her hand resting protectively on Pearl's shoulder. We need to leave. Her voice was soft but immovable. Jonas took another step, emotion tightening his jaw. He looked like a storm gathering strength, ready to break apart anything in its path. But Kira couldn't allow him to get close. Not here, not now, not ever, if she could help it. When she turned to guide the girls toward the door, Jonas whispered a broken sound that didn't quite become her name. Sapphire tugged her hand nervously. Ruby asked what was wrong. Pearl stared at Jonas with a fierce, suspicious glare that reminded Kira achingly of herself. Outside, the sunlight felt too bright, too sharp. She hurried the girls to the car, buckling them in with shaking hands. Her breath came shallow and uneven as the magnitude of what had just happened finally hit her. He knew. He had seen them. There was no hiding now. Kira pressed her forehead to the steering wheel, trying to steady her racing thoughts. The contract, the threat, the years of silence she had endured to protect her daughters. All of it had crumbled in a single accidental encounter. Inside the boutique, Jonas remained standing in the same aisle, staring at the space where she had been moments earlier. The shock faded slowly, replaced by something far more determined, far more dangerous. Hope. Desperation. Resolve. He moved toward the door as if compelled by something he no longer had control over. Because in one glance, he had seen the truth written in 3 pairs of gray eyes. His daughters. And he would not let them disappear again. Kira managed to get the girls settled on the living room floor with their favorite snacks and a cartoon playing softly, but her hands were still trembling as she locked the front door. Her pulse hammered in her ears. Her skin felt too tight. Every cell in her body screamed danger, even though the apartment was quiet, even though her daughters were giggling at animated animals dancing across the screen. She paced the small kitchen, trying to calm her rising panic. She had spent years building a life so hidden, even her former self would not have recognized it. Yet one accidental moment in a children's boutique had shattered every layer of protection. Jonas had seen them. He had looked at Sapphire and Ruby and Pearl with a shock so visceral she could feel it across the aisle. He had known, immediately, instinctively, completely. She pressed a hand to her chest, willing her heartbeat to slow. Her phone buzzed violently on the counter, a number she did not recognize. Then another, and another, one from a different area code, one from an unknown caller, one from a blocked ID. He was trying every possible way to reach her. She silenced the device, but the ringing started again seconds later. She turned it off entirely, but the sound of the last vibration echoed in her bones. The girls squealed with laughter in the next room, unaware their world had just tilted. Kara forced a smile when Sapphire called for her, then retreated to the hallway to wipe her eyes before returning to sit with them. She curled Pearl into her lap, ran a soft hand over Ruby's hair, pressed a kiss to Sapphire's forehead, clinging to the reassurance of their warm, familiar weight. These 3 little lives were why she had disappeared, why she had endured months of sickness, fear, and isolation. Why she had accepted a contract she still regretted signing even though it saved them. And now the past had found her anyway. As the evening settled, Kara moved through their bedtime routine automatically. Bathwater, pajamas, braiding Sapphire's curls, untangling Ruby's hair, rocking Pearl as she fought sleep like she always did. The motions grounded her, but anxiety sat like a stone in her stomach. When the girls finally drifted off in their 3 small beds, she stood in the doorway watching their peaceful faces. Moonlight glowed across their cheeks, highlighting soft features that mirrored her own and unmistakably echoed the man who had seen them hours earlier. She closed their door gently and leaned against the hallway wall, strength draining from her body like water spilling through open fingers. The doorbell rang, a sharp, insistent sound that punctured the fragile stillness of the apartment. Her blood turned to ice. She walked to the door on shaking legs and peered through the peephole. Jonas stood in the dim hallway, still wearing the suit from earlier, though it looked rumpled now. His tie hung loose. His hair fell across his forehead from running his hands through it. His eyes were red-rimmed, locked on her door with an expression that was equal parts grief and determination. He lifted a hand and pressed his palm flat against the wood, right where she stood on the other side. He whispered something she couldn't hear, his forehead lowering until it rested against the door like he needed the support to stay upright. Kira closed her eyes. She did not open the door. She did not speak. But she did not move away either. Minutes passed. then an hour. She checked the girls twice, waited for him to give up, and prayed for him to leave. But when she returned to the living room, he was still there. Sitting against her door now, shoulders slumped, legs stretched out, as though he planned to stay until morning if that was what it took. The sight fractured something in her chest that she wished had stayed solid. She made tea to calm her nerves. She washed dishes that were already clean. She folded the laundry she had folded earlier in the day. She did everything except the one thing that mattered. Finally, long after midnight, when exhaustion pressed down heavier than fear, she unlocked the door. Slowly, quietly, barely breathing. The hinge creaked and Jonas startled awake, blinking up at her in disbelief. He looked younger in that vulnerable moment, stripped of wealth, power, and pride. Just a man who had lost something he never knew he had and had finally found it again. Kira stepped aside, but she did not invite him with words. She waited. He rose slowly, as though afraid any sudden movement would make her disappear. He entered her small apartment cautiously, his eyes moving across the room as he absorbed the space where his daughters lived, where their drawings hung on the fridge, and where tiny shoes lined the carpet. He stood in the kitchen doorway, hands shaking, voice barely above a whisper. "Are they really mine?" Kira exhaled, the sound fragile and tired. "Yes." That single word hit him like a tidal wave. His breath broke. He reached for the counter as if the truth had stolen the strength from his legs. He spoke again, voice full of everything she wished she didn't hear. "Why didn't you tell me? Where were you? Why did you disappear? Why did you face everything alone?" The questions tumbled out, desperate and raw. Kira steadied herself before answering. When she finally spoke, her words came gently but unyieldingly, edged with the truth she had carried like a burden for years. "You made your choice long before I made mine." Jonas froze, pain flaring across his face like a crack in glass. And for the first time since she fled her old life, Kira allowed herself to speak the story she had kept locked behind silence, breath by breath, detail by detail. While behind the closed bedroom door, 3 small girls slept peacefully, unaware that everything they knew was about to change. Kira stood in the quiet kitchen, her fingers wrapped around a mug she no longer remembered making, its steam fading into the dimness. Jonas remained at the table, elbows braced against its edge, as though he needed it to keep himself anchored. The silence between them trembled with everything unsaid, everything avoided, everything waiting to be revealed. When she finally began to speak, her voice was soft but steady, like someone guiding herself carefully across thin ice. "I tried to tell you, but you were already gone." He flinched, confusion knitting his brows. So she continued, slowly unraveling the story he had never allowed himself to imagine. She told him about the morning sickness that started too early, the fear she swallowed silently because she still believed he would fight for them. The night she held a pregnancy test in her shaking hands while rain hammered the windows, remembering him standing in that same rain, confessing he could not choose her. Jonas listened with a grief so raw it seemed to burn through his chest. Kira told him about calling his phone during his rehearsal dinner, how a stranger had answered, how laughter and champagne clinking in the background had made her heart splinter in half. "I realized then," she whispered, "that your new life had already begun." He covered his face with his hands, shoulders shaking with the weight of regret. But she wasn't finished. She explained the blood disorder that had nearly killed her, the specialist appointment she had attended alone, the emergency transfusions, the nights her vision blurred, and she thought she would faint before reaching the toilet. Jonas's breathing turned uneven. He stared at her like he was seeing someone forged from iron and fire instead of the woman he once left in a doorway. When she described the day she learned she was carrying triplets, he inhaled sharply, as if struck. Triplets. You were alone, and you were carrying triplets. The disbelief in his voice was complete with guilt. Kira nodded, the memory pulling at her like an undertow. She told him how the foundation representative had appeared at her hospital bed with polite smiles and cold threats. How she had been offered life-saving care for the babies in exchange for disappearing forever, signing away any right to reach him. Jonas's voice broke. "My mother." Kira didn't answer because she didn't need to. His expression said everything. She continued with the most challenging part, the hospital, the hours of surgery. Her heart stopped twice on the operating table. The first time she saw the triplets in their tiny isolates, covered in tubes, fighting for breath. These things carved themselves into the quiet space between them, filling the room with aching truth. Jonas stared down at his hands, knuckles white. "I would have come for you. I would have chosen you. I would have burned everything down." Kira shook her head slowly, gently. "You didn't choose me then. I couldn't risk you choosing me too late." The words were not cruel. They were simply honest. He wanted to argue, but how could he? The past was a sealed door he could not rewrite, no matter how desperately he wished he could. Kara told him about moving away and raising 3 infants in a small apartment, where silence and exhaustion were constant companions. About building her business in stolen hours between feedings. About celebrating milestones alone. About crying silently in the doorway on birthdays because she was grateful her daughters were alive, but mourning the father they would never know. By the time she finished, her voice trembled with exhaustion. She pressed a hand to the counter and exhaled slowly, as though releasing years of the story she had kept locked inside her ribs. Jonas rose from his chair slowly, carefully, as if any sudden movement would cause the fragile moment to shatter. He approached her, stopping with enough distance to respect the boundaries she had every right to hold. "I failed you," he said softly. "Not just once. I failed you every day I didn't look for you harder. Every day I believed the lie that you had walked away. Every day I let someone else tell me what my life should be." His voice cracked. "And I failed them too. My daughters. I missed their first breaths, their first cries, their first smiles. Years I will never get back." Kira looked at him, her expression unreadable, a delicate balance of pain and resilience. He lifted his gaze to hers with a depth of sincerity she had never seen from him before. "Please, Kira, let me be a part of their lives now. Let me be what I should have been from the beginning. Not for me, for them." Kira's breath caught. For the first time that night, her eyes softened, just slightly. But her fear stood just as tall as her hope. She had survived too much to let promises sway her easily. "The girls deserve the truth," she whispered. "They deserve a father who stays." Jonas nodded, tears sliding down his face silently. "Then I'll stay, as long as it takes, as long as you'll let me." The room fell quiet again, but the silence no longer felt suffocating. It felt like a path forming between 2 worlds that had once been torn apart. From the bedroom, Pearl stirred softly, letting out a sleepy sigh. Then Ruby turned over. Sapphire murmured something in her dream. Jonas looked toward the hallway as though hearing angels. Kira closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them, something in her expression had shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet. But a door she had held closed for years was no longer locked. Morning light crept through the blinds in thin gold lines, brushing against the edges of Kira's small living room. Jonas had not slept. He sat on the couch where she had told him to stay, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped so tightly that his knuckles were pale. Every few minutes, he lifted his head toward the hallway, listening for the sound of his daughters waking. The reality that they existed, that they were only a few steps away, felt both miraculous and unbearable. Kira emerged from her bedroom with quiet footsteps, her exhaustion visible in the soft shadows under her eyes. She hesitated when she saw him still there, as if she had expected him to disappear in the night. He stood when she entered, instinctively straightening as though bracing for judgment. They didn't speak at first. The silence was thick with everything they had learned about each other the night before. Everything broken, everything fragile. Kira moved to the kitchen table and sat. She folded her hands neatly, bracing herself for whatever needed to come next. Her expression was calm, but her posture carried a careful readiness, like someone who would not allow herself to be undone twice. Jonas took the seat across from her, but he didn't dare speak until she nodded. "We need to talk about what comes next," she said quietly. He exhaled, equal parts relief and dread. He nodded, waiting. "Before you decide anything," she continued, "you need to understand where I stand. My daughters come first, always. Their safety, their happiness, their stability. Everything else falls after that." "I know," he whispered. "Do you?" His breath hitched. No excuses rose to his lips, no protest, no defense, only the truth. "I do now." She held his gaze for a long moment, searching for sincerity, weakness, or lies. But Jonas had run out of lies the day he watched 3 small girls stare back at him with his own gray eyes. Her voice softened, though not with forgiveness, just clarity. "I am not asking you to stay or leave. I am telling you that if you want to be in their lives, it cannot be a temporary arrangement. It cannot be performative. It cannot be something you abandon when it gets hard." He swallowed hard. "I would never leave them." "You left me," she reminded, not with cruelty, but with simple, devastating accuracy. His eyes closed for a brief moment, guilt washing over him again. When he opened them, his resolve was sharper. "Then I will spend the rest of my life proving I will not fail them the way I failed you." Kira breathed in slowly, then stood. Before she could say more, small footsteps pattered down the hallway. The triplets emerged in a tangle of curls and pajamas, rubbing sleep from their eyes. Sapphire saw Jonas first. She froze, her little brows furrowing as she studied him. Ruby clung to Kira's leg. Pearl, bold as always, stepped closer with suspicion etched across her tiny face. Jonas went still, unsure whether to kneel, speak, or breathe. Kira crouched to meet her daughter's eyes. "Girls, this is Jonas." Ruby whispered, "Who is he?" Kira hesitated only a heartbeat. "He's someone who cares about you, someone you're going to get to know." Pearl crossed her arms with 4-year-old seriousness. "He looks sad." Jonas nearly broke. Sapphire tilted her head. Her gaze was curious but cautious, the same piercing gray that had undone him in the boutique. "Are you staying?" Jonas felt something inside him shift, firm and unshakable, "If you want me to." Pearl stepped closer, reached out, and poked his knee experimentally. "You're real." He laughed softly, the first sound of lightness in days. "I am." Kira watched the interaction with guarded eyes. Her daughters, so innocent, had no idea how fragile this moment was, how it could have shattered her, how it still might. But their instinctive acceptance, whether tentative or bold, told her something she had not expected to hear this morning. Jonas's place in their world had already begun forming before she could control it. Later, after breakfast, Jonas asked quietly, "Can I take them to the park with you?" Kira thought for a long moment, weighing fear against possibility, past against future. Then she nodded. "We will all go together." They bundled the girls into coats and shoes, tiny hands slipping into larger ones. The sun was bright when they stepped outside, a crispness in the air that made Sapphire laugh, and Ruby gasped delightedly at their breath turning visible. Pearl pulled Jonas forward the moment they reached the park gate, dragging him toward the swings with an authority that made him stumble after her. Kira watched him push Pearl gently, carefully, as though she were made of glass and fire at once. She watched Sapphire tug his sleeve to show him a leaf that resembled a star. She watched Ruby stay close to her, but glance often toward Jonas, studying him with quiet curiosity. Something warm pressed into Kira's chest, though she tried to suppress it. Later, as the girls played on the climbing structure, Jonas approached her, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "I have to confront her." Kira stiffened. "Your mother." He nodded. "She did this. She made you disappear. She stole years from all of us. I will not let her manipulate our lives again." Kira wrapped her arms around herself, remembering the cold voice of the Foundation representative, the contract, the threat, the fear. "What will you say to her?" "Everything I should have said years ago." She studied him carefully. "This is not just about anger." No, he agreed. It's about reclaiming what she tried to take. He glanced toward the girls, watching them run across the playground. Kira, I want you there when I confront her. She blinked, startled. Me? Jonas nodded. I need her to see the truth. I need her to look at the family she tried to erase. And I need her to understand that you are not someone she gets to decide away. Kira looked away, heart pounding. The idea terrified her, but it also felt necessary. She exhaled shakily. I will go with you. Jonas's shoulders dropped with relief. They watched their daughters laugh in the sunlight, small bursts of joy cutting through years of shadows. And for the first time since their worlds tore apart, the path ahead, however frightening, felt like something they might face together. The Welsh estate stood like a monument to old wealth, its pristine lawn stretching toward a house that seemed carved from stone and steeped in legacy. Kara had not seen it in years, yet the sight of it still sent a tremor through her. The last time she had been anywhere near Jonas's family, she had been invisible. A problem to remove. A distraction to eliminate. A woman unworthy of the future they crafted for their son. Now she arrived not as a secret, not as a shadow, but as the mother of 3 daughters who carried the Welsh gray in their eyes. Jonas parked the car at the foot of the long driveway and turned off the engine. For a moment, they sat in silence. The girls, buckled in the back, stared at the enormous house with awe. Is that a castle? Sapphire whispered. Kind of, Jonas murmured, forcing a faint smile. Pearl squinted. Why is it so big? Does someone tall live there? Ruby held her stuffed rabbit close. I don't like it. It looks too quiet. Kira reached back and squeezed her daughter's hand. It's just a house, baby. But her own pulse belied her words. She felt the weight of the contract sitting like a ghost at the base of her throat. She remembered the cold voice telling her what would happen if she ever contacted Jonas. If she ever disrupted the life his mother had planned. She remembered signing her name on the final page, knowing she had no choice. Jonas looked at her, reading every fear in her eyes. I won't let her touch you again. Not with threats, not with money, not with lies. Kira nodded, though her breath came shallow. The girls were his anchor, but she was the one who had lived through the consequences. They stepped out together, a single unit walking toward the mansion that had once shaped the fate of their lives. Diane Welsh opened the door before they even knocked. She wore tailored elegance, jewelry that glittered, and an expression honed by decades of knowing exactly how much power she wielded. But when her eyes landed on the triplets, something cracked. She blanched. She gripped the edge of the door, her perfectly poised breath faltered. Sapphire tilted her head curiously. Ruby stepped halfway behind Kira. Pearl crossed her arms with fierce suspicion. Diane's voice emerged thin and trembling. Jonas, what is this? The truth, Jonas said, stepping forward. The truth you kept from me. The truth you tried to erase. Diane's gaze darted to Kira, and her composure snapped into something sharper, something familiar. I see you decided to return at a convenient moment. Kira stiffened, but Jonas moved instantly, placing himself between them. You will not speak to her like that. Not anymore. Diane blinked as though she had just been slapped. Jonas had never challenged her in his life, not like this. He lifted a folder and dropped it on the foyer table. Documents spilled out. Investigator reports, receipts, contracts, signatures. Your foundation contact, Jonas said. Your legal team. Your manipulation. Your silence. Everything you did to make sure I never found out about my children. Diane's lips parted in protest, but Jonas continued, unrelenting. You hired people to track her. You knew she was pregnant within weeks. You knew she was carrying triplets, and instead of helping her without conditions, you bought her silence. Pearl whispered to Ruby, that lady looks like she's melting. Ruby nodded solemnly like ice cream in the sun. Kira almost laughed despite herself, but the tension in her chest held tight. Diane's voice rose, desperate and brittle. I did what I had to. You were about to destroy everything, our company, our future, our reputation. You were too blinded by emotion to see that she would ruin you." Jonas's expression darkened, the last remnants of the obedient son dying in his eyes. "You were wrong. She didn't ruin me. You did. You destroyed years of my life and theirs because you thought you had the right to choose my family for me." He motioned to the girls. "Look at them. Look at what you took from me, from them, from her." Diane's gaze softened, conflicted. The triplets stared back at her with wide eyes, 3 variations of the same expression. A legacy she had tried to sever now stood before her in undeniable form. "They look like you," Sapphire said bluntly to Jonas. "They look like her too," he whispered. Diane swallowed hard, tears gathering at the edges of her lashes. This was never my intention. I did not expect you to forgive me, but I cannot let my family be torn apart over this." Kira finally spoke, her voice quiet but unwavering. "You already did. You didn't realize it." Diane turned to her, a hint of defeat in her posture. "What can I do?" Kara exchanged a glance with Jonas, who nodded once. "Respect boundaries," Kara said. "Truly, respect mine, respect theirs. No more interference, no more control. You may be their grandmother, but trust takes time, and rebuilding takes longer." Diane closed her eyes briefly, then nodded with a humility that once would have been impossible for her. The girls watched this exchange with varying levels of fascination. Pearl tugged Jonas's sleeve. "Will she be nice now?" Jonas bent down. "She will try." Kara felt the air shift. Not healed, not forgiven, but changed. Later, walking back to the car, Sapphire held Kara's hand while Ruby carried her rabbit proudly. Pearl marched in front as though leading a small army. Jonas walked beside Kara, a quiet strength in each step. "You were incredible back there," he whispered. "I was terrified," she admitted. "Courage is something people only recognize in hindsight," Jonas said softly. "What you did today was brave." They reached the car in silence, but not the old kind. Not the heavy, haunted silence of secrets and separation. This time, the silence held possibility. For the first time, Kira realized that confronting the past had not broken her. It had freed her. And standing beside her, Jonas realized something too. The empire his mother once ruled no longer controlled his life. The new empire he wanted to build was now beside him. 1 woman, 3 daughters, and a future he would fight for with every breath. The days that followed felt strangely gentle, as if life itself had paused long enough for Kira and Jonas to breathe for the first time in years. Nothing was perfect, nothing was simple, but the heaviness that once clung to every moment began to loosen, thread by thread, replaced by something quiet and unfamiliar. Hope. Jonas kept his promise. He showed up every morning, sometimes before the sun fully rose, carrying a bag of groceries or small toys he insisted were unnecessary but undeniably thoughtful. He learned the rhythm of the triplets' days, memorized their favorite foods, their tantrum triggers, their secret signals. Sapphire loved stargazing, even during the day. Ruby wanted matching braids every morning. Pearl refused help with anything, even tasks that clearly required help, like putting both legs into the same pant leg. Kira watched him with cautious eyes, always waiting for the moment he would falter, slip, or disappear. But he didn't, not once. He listened, he learned, he stayed. The girls warmed to him in their own ways. Sapphire was the first. She accepted him with quiet curiosity, asking endless questions about his job, his childhood, and his favorite color. Ruby took longer. She was gentle in spirit, hesitant, and deeply attached to Kira. But after Jonas spent 2 hours searching the park for her lost rabbit, Ruby climbed into his lap and fell asleep against his chest. Pearl, however, was the storm child. Fearless, suspicious, fiercely protective of her sisters. She tested Jonas constantly, challenging him and matching his stare for stare. But when she heard him stand up for Kira at the estate, something changed. Pearl did not trust easily, but she respected strength. One afternoon, as Jonas helped her fasten her tiny coat, Pearl announced with the gravity of a queen knighting a knight. "I guess you can stay." Jonas laughed with startled joy. "I would be honored." But rebuilding was not just about the girls, it was about Kira. She had spent years holding her world together with shaking hands. Allowing someone else in meant loosening her grip, trusting someone with the most precious things she had ever fought for. It terrified her, it thrilled her, it made her feel both vulnerable and powerful simultaneously. One evening, after the girls had fallen asleep in a pile of blankets on the couch, Kira found Jonas quietly washing dishes in her kitchen. It was the simplest thing, yet something inside her chest tightened, not with pain, but with recognition. She leaned against the doorframe. "You don't have to do that." He dried the last plate and set it aside. "I know, but I want to." Kira crossed the room, her steps slow and deliberate. Jonas oversaw her, not moving, not reaching, waiting for her to lead. When she finally stood in front of him, she breathed him in, the faint scent of cedar and something familiar she couldn't name. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked quietly. Jonas held her gaze with a calm sincerity she had never seen in him before. "Because it is my responsibility. Because it is my joy. Because loving them means being here for you too. And because I am finally becoming the man I should have been years ago." Kira's breath trembled. The words were everything she needed, and nothing she felt ready to accept. She stepped back, not in rejection, but in self-protection. He understood immediately. He didn't push. He didn't demand. He nodded once, promising her with silence that he would move at her pace. And he kept that promise. When the triplets' first day of preschool arrived, Jonas stood beside Kira at the classroom door, watching Sapphire skip inside with excitement, Ruby clutch her rabbit tightly, and Pearl march forward like she owned the place. As soon as the girls vanished inside, Kira's composure cracked. Her hands shook. Her breath hitched. Jonas touched her elbow lightly. "They will be okay." She let out a shaky laugh. "I know. It's me who's not." For a moment, her vulnerability hung between them like suspended glass. Jonas could have stepped closer, could have held her, kissed her, reached for the future blooming between them. But instead, he whispered, "You don't have to be strong every second. I'm here. You can lean on me if you ever want to." And that was the moment Kira felt something shift. Not all at once, not painfully, but slowly, like dawn stretching across a dark horizon. Weeks turned to months. The girls flourished with both of them present. Jonas balanced his business with fatherhood, choosing bedtime stories over corporate dinners. He sold his luxury downtown condo and moved into a smaller place near Kira's apartment, a gesture she did not comment on, but quietly noted with gratitude. Their routines wove together in soft, steady patterns. Morning coffees, shared school drop-offs, late nights discussing the girls' futures, quiet laughter in the kitchen long after the triplets fell asleep. One night, after putting the girls to bed, they sat together on the fire escape under a vast moonlit sky. The air was cool. The city below hummed with distant life. Kira rested her arms on her knees while Jonas sat beside her, hands clasped loosely. He turned to her with gentle certainty. "I know I broke us once, but I want to spend the rest of my life making us whole. Not perfect, not rushed, just whole, in whatever shape we choose." Kira closed her eyes, letting the warm night breeze brush her face. When she looked at him again, something new glowed in her expression. Not forgiveness, not surrender, but invitation. "Then try," she said softly. "Please show me." Jonas nodded, his voice low. "Every day, for as long as you let me." And as the moon hung steady above them, the distance that once defined their world finally began to disappear. Spring arrived gently, brushing the city with soft breezes and early blooms that dotted every sidewalk. It felt like the world had taken a deep breath after a long winter, and for the first time in years, Kira felt her own breath follow that rhythm. Life had settled into a balance she once believed impossible. Not perfect, not without challenges, but steady enough that her heart no longer clenched with every unexpected knock on the door or every unknown phone call. On a warm Saturday morning, Jonas arrived early as usual, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers Sapphire insisted he pick because, in her words, they smelled like sunshine. Pearl claimed she hated flowers, but tucked one behind her ear the moment no one watched. Ruby handed him her rabbit for safekeeping, the highest honor in her little universe. Kira watched them tumble into the apartment, their whirlwind of laughter filling the air. The sight eased something inside her every single time, even if she tried to hide it. Today, Jonas seemed restless in a way she couldn't quite name. He kept smoothing his shirt, checking his watch, pacing lightly as if carrying a weight he wasn't sure how to place. She raised an eyebrow when she caught him staring at her for the 7th time. "Is something wrong?" he blinked, startled. "No, nothing is wrong. Everything is right." She narrowed her eyes suspiciously, but he only smiled, the kind of smile that held secrets yet felt safe. The girls tugged her toward the park, insisting today was a picnic day. Pearl had packed half the pantry in her tiny backpack, determined to contribute. Ruby had chosen matching ribbons for all 3 of them. Sapphire carried a small notebook, claiming she wanted to write a story about their family. Kira felt her chest warm at that word, family. It had taken years to reach it, to allow it, to believe in it. And now she felt the words settle into her bones like truth. At the park, they chose a spot beneath the old oak tree. The sunlight filtered through its branches in soft, golden pools. Birds trilled overhead. People passed by with dogs and strollers, smiling at the sight of 3 identical little girls chasing bubbles in the grass. Jonas spread a blanket and gestured for Kira to sit beside him. She did, stretching her legs out in the warm grass. For a few long minutes, they watched the girls play, laughter filling the air like music. He spoke first, voice soft. "They look so happy." "They are," Kira said with a slow inhale, "and that is everything." Jonas nodded, but tension still coiled beneath his calm. She noticed. "Of course she did." "Please tell me what is bothering you," she murmured. "You have been strange all morning." Just as he opened his mouth, Pearl shrieked with excitement and barreled toward them, dragging her sisters behind her. "Mama, Daddy, see!" The word daddy slipped out naturally, unforced, unprompted. Jonas froze. Kira's heartbeat stuttered. It was not the first time one of the girls had said it, but each time it still struck a deep chord. Pearl led them toward a cluster of daisies she insisted were magical because they grew in a perfect circle. Jonas knelt, inspecting them as if they were the wonders she believed. Kira watched him, feeling something shift in the quiet space between them. A soft recognition, a blooming certainty. He returned to her side slowly, breath unsteady. "Kira," he said, voice trembling, "I have something I want to ask you." Her throat tightened. Jonas sank to one knee before she could respond. Her breath caught in her chest as the world around them blurred into a gentle hush. He held no jewelry box, no elaborate gesture, only a simple gold band held between his fingers, its shine soft and warm in the sun. Kira's lips parted, her heart racing. Jonas took a slow breath. "I spent years living a life someone else built for me, a life that never felt like mine, a life that cost me you, cost me them. But this life I have now, the one we have built day by day, choice by choice, is the only one I want. You and the girls are my family, Kira, my home, my beginning and my end. I cannot change the past, but I can choose every day that comes after this one, and I choose you." Her eyes flooded instantly. He continued, voice breaking. "Marry me. Not for the story, not for the children, not for redemption, but because I love you more deeply and more honestly than I ever understood I could love someone. Because loving you has made me become the man I should have been all along. And because I want to spend the rest of my life proving that you and our daughters are my forever." The wind tugged gently at her hair. The girls watched with wide eyes, clutching each other as though witnessing something magical. Ruby pressed her rabbit to her mouth, trembling with excitement. Sapphire was already crying. Pearl crossed her arms as if daring her mother to say anything but yes. Kira inhaled shakily, tears sliding down her cheeks. For a brief, suspended moment, she saw every chapter of her life play behind her eyes. The rain that broke her, the hospital lights that nearly took her, the years of silence, the fear, the survival, the rebirth, the slow return of trust, the laughter of her daughters, the constancy of Jonas's new devotion. All of it had led here, to this moment, to this choice. She knelt before him, a soft smile trembling on her lips. Yes. The girls screamed with joy, tackling them both in a tangle of arms and giggles. Jonas wrapped them all together, holding them as though anchoring the world itself. Later that evening, they held a small ceremony under the oak tree, officiated by a kind stranger passing by who happened to be licensed. Sapphire threw flower petals. Ruby had the rings. Pearl insisted on announcing each vow loudly, making everyone laugh. It was imperfect and beautiful, simple and sacred. Not a performance, not a spectacle, just love, chosen freely. As the sun dipped beneath the horizon, Kira leaned into Jonas, whispering against his shoulder. "We are whole now." He kissed her hair, voice full of wonder. "We always were. We just needed time to see it." And as their daughters danced barefoot in the grass, laughter echoing into the twilight, Kira realized she had finally stepped into the life she once believed was impossible. A life not borrowed, not hidden, not broken. A life built from courage, forgiveness, and a love that had found its way back home.